You can control watercolor paper by getting it wet or having it dry. Basically, what this means is that if the paper is wet, when you add paint, the paint will spread throughout that wet region. So as soon as I put this down, I got the paper wet, and then when I put the paint into it, see how it spreads? It kind of looks like tie-dye. Depending on how wet the paper is, it's gonna keep spreading. If I were to do this and like tilt it a little bit to kind of show and exaggerate it a little bit, it's gonna travel, but for the most part, it stops where the paper is wet, okay? Paper is wet right there. And see how it kind of stopped. If you have a ton, it's gonna drip, obviously. So the advantage of that is that if I wanna make an area that's all evenly pink, I'm gonna kind of re-emphasize this, and I'm kind of getting it wet with pink so that you guys can kind of see where it's wet. In theory, as you're learning, you know, sometimes people are like, this totally didn't work, you know, but in theory, as you drop paint, it's gonna spread and you're not gonna get hard edges. So all that means is that as I'm kind of diluting and painting this pink color, if I were to go over it all evenly, you know, not just dropping in that really, really dark part. Okay, I kind of exaggerated how much water is on this paper for you, so you can see. But the theory is that the color is gonna spread and give you an even box. It might take a little bit of practice. The amount of water, how wet the paper is, and all that are things for you to kind of start practicing with, which is part of the first exercise. Well, let's say you want to have a little bit more control, though. If the paper is wet, okay, paper is wet, the colors are going to spread. The other thing is that if the paper is wet, you can see this like pooling up like this. I'm on a slightly tilted surface. So you notice how this is doing this? Watercolor really wants to be flat. You do want to try and let your paints dry on a flat surface. See how that's already starting to spread out a little bit? So because I'm on a work desk that's slightly tilted, it's already doing that. So you can kind of see if it's tilted, it's going to dry unevenly. One rule, when you're painting, try and paint on a flat surface for watercolor. And then when you let things dry, always put your painting flat so that it dries evenly. So now if I want to actually have control and not have things spread, then dry paper, even with a big brush, I can control those lines, okay? All of this, as soon as the wet paint crosses over something else that's wet, they're gonna start merging. So just remember that anytime that the paper is wet, anytime that the paint is wet, colors are going to mix together. Even if I'm trying to be precise like this, because that pink was wet, I can't keep them from mixing. Okay, kind of see it real good right there. The purple and the pink are merging. If I were to put blue, or purple, sorry. If I were to put purple in here, guess what happens? The purple and pink are mixing. Just always remember, if you want things to mix, if you want things to have nice soft edges, this technique works great some of the times. I paint wet on wet all the time. It's just called wet paper, wet paint. I use this technique a lot. But usually that's like kind of in the background, my beginning layer. And then I do more of like a dry brush is what's called. Dry brush is where the paper's dry, and for the most part the brush is not dry because you have to have some water, but I'm just kind of controlling it on the dry paper. Anything wet, even if it's a small area, still gonna mix. I am going to post a paper that says what's gonna happen where. All right, you're gonna have 3 boxes. First box, I'm going to show you. We're going to do 2 wet on wet with 2 colors, kind of what I just did. The first one is a layer of color. So you can see I already did that. But you're going to do one, and then you have to let this dry before you do the next one. One tip is you can feel it. If it feels slightly cool to the touch, it's still wet. This one you're going to overlap two colors. So you're going to do a box, paint it one color, let it dry completely, and then you're going to go over it with another box, or another color in the other box. Right down here. So just remember that when you have wet paper, even right now, part of it looks wet in the middle. That side's like, is that dry? It actually feels kind of cool still. If I were to come in and try to do a little bit of detail on top of it, let's say, right? So I came in here with like green or something. Since I have this green left over here. If I start putting this and trying to do lines, even though it looks dry, it's going to start spreading. So general rule of thumb, if you are doing a project, watercolor takes a little patience. I did these about 10 minutes ago. They seem dry, right? But if I started painting on them, they would probably spread. When you guys are using your watercolor paper, just understand you have enough for, you know, the watercolor projects. You have enough pieces of watercolor paper. You do not have enough to start over if you don't like how it turns out. And even in class, I really try to stress not starting over all the time. We learn from our mistakes, and sometimes it just goes in a different direction, and that's just how it is. But right here, you're just going to paint two colors, what we call wet on wet. So for that one, it's really what I just did here. I did the pink, except for the green. I did the pink one, okay, and then I dropped the purple in, and the two colors just kind of mixed together. Second one, you're going to paint your rectangle any color, let it dry 100%. So you may have to come back to it later. And then you're going to do a little bit of dry brush on top, which is basically this kind of thing. Just make some marks and work on trying to get like a little brush control. You can put your name in there if you want. That's totally fine. Something just a little more of a detail kind of a thing. And then this one, you're going to paint one box, the whole thing, okay? And then you're going to come back and say I pick a different color. Say I pick like blue or something. I'm going to paint this whole blue. The whole point is seeing how you can create different colors by overlapping them instead of pre-mixing them. Just a different technique. So you guys are working on brush control, you're working on techniques, you're working on getting used to the colors in your paints and getting real familiar with the whole process. We'll go over this more in live session. We'll be able to take questions and answers, but I wanted to be able to do this on video so you guys could come back to it if you have questions. I'm also going to post a PDF for the assignment with these directions on how to set this up.